Methodist Church Wesley Bible Study. Today we're going to be doing chapter 10 in the book of Joshua. And these are not some of my favorite chapters, but we'll go into why they're in here. If this were happening today, everything that's in chapter 10 and 11 would be considered an atrocity. And so let's take a look at the good people of Israel, see how they are. Okay. When King Adonai-Zedek of Jerusalem heard how Joshua had taken Ai and how he utterly destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he became greatly frightened, because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the royal cities, and was larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. Okay, what's going on? What's going on is that the invasion of Canaan has begun. And Jericho fell. Another large, moderate city called Ai also fell. And they annihilated everybody in those cities. The good people of Israel annihilated all the people who lived in Jericho and in Ai. So we're seeing the rest of the people who are in Canaan decide that they're going to come together. Okay, Gibeon is not coming together with the rest. Gibeon has made a treaty with Israel, and it's really a cost-effective treaty for them. For one thing, they're not all going to get annihilated. They have a certain portion of their population that will serve as slave labor for the tabernacle of the Israelites, providing wood and water to them. So we're not talking about the whole population of Ai. Pretty much the city is going to, and not just the city of Gibeon. I'm sorry, I keep saying Ai, but it's Gibeon. The people of the Gibeon region are going to be protected from annihilation by Israel, but it goes further than that. So King Adonai-Zedek of Jerusalem sent a message to King Hoham of Hebron, to King Piram of Jarmuth, to King Japhia of Lachish, to King Debir of Eglon, saying, "Come up and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for he has made peace with Joshua and with the Israelites." Now, what's the business about that? Well, Gibeon did not join the coalition. And because they did not join the coalition, they're going to show, first of all, that the rest of the kingdoms consider this to be a betrayal, and secondly, that Israel will not protect them. So they're testing whether or not the alliance between Israel and Gibeon is a viable alliance. Okay. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and camped against Gibeon and made war against it. And the Gibeonites sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who live in the hill country are gathered against us." So Joshua went up from Gilgal, and he and all the fighting force with him, all the mighty warriors. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them shall stand before you." So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. So this is a surprise attack, apparently at dawn. Dawn is the time to attack. Even in 21st century, dawn is the time to attack. Every dawn in Iraq, we had what we call a stand to, and everybody had to get up, get into their foxholes, make sure that their weapons were ready and loaded and everything, and we would stand to until the sun was up, and then we would go back about our business. But everybody had to stand to at dawn, because dawn is always the time you come in and attack, and they did that. Okay, but these guys did not stand to. They got surprised. Okay. All right, and the Lord threw them into panic before Israel, who inflicted a crushing blow on them at Gibeon, chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And they fled before Israel while they were going down the slope of Beth Horon. The Lord threw down huge stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the Israelites killed with the sword. Bummer day for the other people. I'm pretty sure hailstorms are pretty rare over there, but all of a sudden there's a hailstorm fortuitously. Okay, once again, this is one of those fortuitous miracles, and it's a sense of, this hailstorm had been coming, and the Lord had better weather reports than anybody else, and knew that this was going to be a hailstorm day, and this just happened to be the day that they attacked all these coalition of forces. Now here's the problem. The problem is that they're all camped outside of Gibeon. All right, so you'll notice that most of the killing that takes place during the rout. As I've said, in combat, the time when the most killing happens is during a rout, and the enemy is fleeing in disarray, and that's when you can really annihilate them. And evidently they did a good job annihilating all these armies. Well, now there's nobody to go back and defend their cities. They've been drawn out. Okay. This is a little bit about like what happened with Caesar in Gaul. There was a city that Caesar wanted to take, and he surrounded the city, and he put up a palisade against them, so in the event that they came out of the city, the Romans would have a defensive position. His idea was just to starve them out, but he found out that other tribes of Gaul were coming after them to break the siege. So he built an outer wall around his forces. So when the Gauls attacked to try and relieve the city, they came up against a Roman fortification, and Caesar was able to drive them off, and then he was able to basically take the city. They had to capitulate because they were starving in there. So, but these people didn't build a wall to defend themselves in their siege against Gibeon, and so they were just left out in the open, and they got attacked from the rear, and it threw them into confusion. You have to understand too that if you are surrounding a city, that it's really hard for the people on one side of the city to talk to people on the other side of the city. So it's much easier to defeat them in detail, because the people on the other side of the city are not going to be able to rally and get around the city to counter your attack. So what happened here was they hit one portion of the siege and penetrated it, and that threw the whole army into confusion. So by the time they got word on the other side of the city that their lines had been penetrated, it was a rout. And that's basically the tactics that were used in that. Okay. Then of course you have a hailstorm that just finishes the job for them. This one was easy peasy. All right. On the day that when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord and said in the sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon." And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. What's going on here? There had been a battle. I forget who it was with, but anyway, during the Exodus, there was a battle, and the battle was going well for the Israelites, but darkness was coming, and basically nobody fights in the dark in those days. You just don't. So the battle was going great for Israel. The problem was that they were losing their daylight, and that meant that the battle was going to be over before the Israelites could totally prevail. And so Joshua and one other stood with Moses, and Moses held up his staff, and as long as the staff was being held up, the sun did not set. Okay? What's going on here? Same thing with Joshua, except now Joshua's not standing there with the staff. He's praying that the sun will stand still, and that they'll have plenty of moonlight. And that's evidently what happened. So, is this now written in the book of Jashar, which we don't have? Okay, I've tried to find it in the Kinston Library, but the book of Jashar is not in the Kinston Library. Okay, the sun stopped in mid-heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. So I had an all-nighter. Okay, there had been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded a human voice, for the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. All right, so the enemy's been routed. So what happens after the enemy has been routed? Meanwhile, these 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave of Makkedah. And it was told Joshua, the 5 kings have been found and hidden in the cave of Makkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them, but do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack them from the rear. So they're in the process of annihilating everybody in a rout, and they know where the kings are hiding out. So they wall up the cave so the kings can't get out, and meanwhile they go chasing the army. Do not let them enter their towns, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the Israelites had finished inflicting a very great blow on them until they were wiped out, and when the survivors, if they were wiped out, where are the survivors? Okay. Survivors had entered into their fortified towns. All the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp of Makkedah, and no one dared to speak against any of the Israelites. So evidently, some of these jokers got back home. All right, don't know how many, but it was not the majority. And Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. They did so and brought the 5 kings out to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. When they brought the kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the Israelites and said to the chiefs of the warriors who had gone with him, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to him, do not be afraid or dismayed, be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all the enemies against whom you fight. All right, now, what's going on? Why put their feet on the necks of the kings? In Middle Eastern cultures to this day, you're not supposed to show the soles of your feet to anyone. It is considered a true insult. So you will see in the Middle East that, like for instance, men do not cross their legs like they do in other countries, because that exposes the sole of their foot to someone else, and that's considered a very high insult. Remember after the fall of Saddam that we pulled down a statue of Saddam in their capital, and the people came out and started hitting the statue of Saddam with their shoes.
That's why they did that.
That's why they did that. And there was a time when George Bush was making a presentation and someone threw their shoes at George Bush. All right? It was considered an extreme insult in their culture. Okay? You can do things inadvertently. Like for instance in Black Hawk Down. Okay? One of the reasons why there was such an uprising against American soldiers in Somalia was that our special operators ride in helicopters, and they ride with their feet hanging over the edge of the helicopters. And when they flew over the people of Somalia with their feet hanging out, the people, all the hundreds and thousands of people that they flew over were considered personally insulted by these Americans because they were showing them the soles of their feet.
Silly traditions.
Yeah, you just got to, it's nice to visit people in other cultures, but you better know that other culture before you go there.
I agree.
Because it's real easy to insult people without realizing it. Okay, but if you show the sole of your foot to someone in the Middle East, it's considered an extreme insult. And so Joshua had the chiefs of his warriors come and put the soles of their feet on the necks of these kings. It was a disgrace. All right. Afterward, just to seal the deal, afterward Joshua struck them down and put them to death and hung them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees until evening. At sunset Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden. Why did they take them down? Why not leave them up there for everybody to see?
I agree.
Because under Mosaic law, if you left a corpse hanging overnight, it contaminated the ground where you hung them. It wasn't just that the person was cursed, the ground over which they hung after sunset was cursed. Now, fast forward to the New Testament, who did they want to take down before sunset? Jesus. Because it was Sabbath, and they did not want the ground around Jerusalem to be contaminated by hanging somebody there. So they took down Jesus and the thieves as well, made sure they were all dead before sunset, and took the bodies down. At sunset, Joshua commanded, they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. They set large stones against the mouth of the cave that remain to this very day. All right. Joshua took Makkedah on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed every person in it. He left no remaining, and he did as he did, and he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua passed from Makkedah and all Israel with him to Libnah and fought against Libnah. And the Lord gave it also and its king into the hand of Israel, and he struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it, and he left no one remaining in it, and he did so to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Next Joshua passed on from Libnah and all Israel with him to Lachish, and laid siege to it and assaulted it. The Lord gave Lachish into the hands of Israel, and he took it on the second day and struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it as he had done to Libnah. Then King Horam of Gezer came up to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people, leaving him no survivors. From Lachish Joshua passed with all Israel to Eglon, and they laid siege to it, assaulted it, took it that day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it he utterly destroyed that day, as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua went up with all Israel from Eglon to Hebron. They assaulted it and took it with the edge of the sword, and its king and its towns and every person in it. He left no one remaining, just as he had done to Eglon, utterly destroyed it with every person in it. Then Joshua and all Israel turned back to Debir and assaulted it, and he took it with its king and all its towns. They struck them with the edge of the sword and utterly destroyed every person in it. He left no one remaining, just as he had done to Hebron, and as he had done to Libnah and its king, so he did to Debir and its king. So Joshua defeated the whole land, the hill country and the Negeb and the lowland and the slopes and all their kings. He left no one remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. And Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon. Joshua took all these kings and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. All right, what are we talking about here? All right, let's look at a map. See if I can expand this a little bit. Yeah. Okay, what we're talking about is this area, all down here. Okay? So, this is the conquest of southern Canaan. These are the territories of the tribe of Judah. Okay, Jerusalem is involved in that as well. So it's Judah and Benjamin, those things that ended up to be tribal areas. So we're talking about just the southern thing. Why? I got to get down here. Come on, camera. Cooperate. There we go. All right. Now, why is it important for this to be recorded? It's important because, remember, the person who commissioned this history to be written was King David. And what King David is doing is defining the territories of Israel and Judah. So right now we're looking at the Judean conquest. And it's all the way to Gaza. It's all the way out here. Here's Gaza. Okay? So it's all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So they've got all of this east of Jordan and all of this down here. All of this is the territory they took. So what David is doing is he's laying claim to these territories. And by annihilating everybody who lives in those territories, there's no one who can counterclaim his ownership of those territories. Now, this is genocide. All right? This is genocide. And, as we look at this, we would say today that David was, or that Joshua, by any modern definition, was a war criminal and should have been tried for doing this. Okay, his excuse was that God told Moses to annihilate all the people in the territory they were going to take. Moses told Joshua to annihilate anybody in the territory they were about to take. And this legitimized what they did. So, what do you think? I've got some 21st century ideas on it.
But you look at two sides. One side is the people were heathens. They didn't believe in God. They probably,
Right.
I don't know, but they probably sacrificed children. They did all kinds of things that were wrong. So one way you look at it says God was right in doing that. But then the other side of that is, well, why doesn't he still do that?
Yeah,
Because there are a lot of, people, the Islam people that do a lot of things that are against God's law. And why does he still not do that? And then the other side is, there were probably a lot of innocent children and women who were just following what they had been taught, and did they really deserve genocide?
well, the men were doing what they were taught.
Yeah. Men sometimes, I think, have a little more free will, especially in that environment, but of course it would take a real brave effort to go against what your leaders, and especially in a tight-knit thing like that, because you'd be killed, I would say.
Yes, there is not a legitimate concept of individual thought in that society. I mean, it's just the idea of individual thought in any of these societies was considered treason. So everything was groupthink. And if the leader had a thought, then everybody else glommed onto it. And we are led to believe that they had no sense of conscience over what they were doing. They did not consider what they were doing was wrong. Now, if you do not consider that what you're doing is wrong, is it still wrong?
Yes,
Yes.
it's still wrong.
Okay, that is not an ancient mindset. That guides us, but it did not guide them. Now, I've got to think that the people who were carrying this out had wives and children of their own. And it's hard for me to imagine that Okay, Hitler geared his society to hate Jews. The whole society already did hate Jews because of the teachings of the church. Okay, Hitler capitalized on that and just brought it up to another level for the entire population by and large. Okay, now there were a lot of people in Germany who did not hate Jews. They had Jewish neighbors and friends and business associates, and they were very pleased to have them in the community, and they did not see them as a threat. And they did not believe the propaganda that Goebbels and Hitler were putting out there. But by and large, the German society was very anti-Semitic. Okay? But in terms of who carried out the mass killings, this is a small cabal within the German military. They were the Einsatzgruppen, and they were special troops, special purpose troops. And you know, they're the ones who ran the camps, so they're the ones who went in and did the mass killings in territories that had been conquered. I think a lot of Germans, when they found out what was actually going on, and they found that out, by the way, way before the end of the war. They knew what was going on in Germany long before the end of the war. But I think a lot of people were horrified at the concept of just annihilating an entire population. But they still stuck with Hitler to the very end. So, you know, go figure. But to do this kind of stuff on a mass scale, sometimes when you do things on a mass scale, you can subliminate your own feelings, your own conscience. You take a look at riots that are happening today in the United States. There is a point at which, if you're not careful, these agitators will get rioters so wound up that a lot of people who had no intention of being violent will turn violent because of the groupthink involved. And they suddenly lose their individual morality, and they just kind of get swept up in the moment. And the idea that what the agitators are trying to do, because I've done riot control, what the agitators really want to do is to get the crowd to that point so that the government forces will get on camera and look like they are brutally retaliating. That's the objective, is to discredit the government in the process of destroying communities. And if you have the right propaganda on your side, you can convince people that the government forces are being incredibly brutal. So you got to be careful. Okay. Well, we're getting to a point where some of us need to get up to the prayer room and start testifying. But I just want you to know that this is genocide. The purpose of the genocide was to cement David's claim to all of this territory without any challenge. And David had already committed genocide years before he became king. So it's not hard for him to justify it in the history that he had commissioned. The problem is that not all the people were actually annihilated. And not all of these communities were so occupied that there wasn't anybody in there to object. Okay, so the narrative goes way beyond what the reality of this movement was. Okay, they're still going to have fights with Philistines and with other native Canaanites long after this, but what David is trying to do is to discredit any claims that those populations might have to their territory. Okay, we're going to do chapter 11. I'm not going to be present here, but I will put it online, and it'll be published the same time. It'll be published at 10 o'clock next Sunday morning, so you can still catch me online to do chapter 11. And chapter 11 deals with, guess what? Northern Israel. All right, so see you next week, and God bless you.
So we don't have Sunday school next week.